So thank you, everybody, and good morning, everyone. I'm Rawlson King, City Councillor for Ward 13, Rideau Rockcliffe, which is located on Algonquin and Anishinaabe land. And I want to thank the Unitarian Church for inviting me to participate in this discussion concerning how municipal government is working to address systemic racism in the City of Ottawa. It is my honor to join you as Council Liaison for Anti-Racism and Ethnocultural Relations to describe the concrete steps that the City of Ottawa is taking to collectively address systemic racism in our community. Unfortunately, over the summer, the pain and anger following the death of George Floyd, an unarmed Black man, at the hands of police in Minneapolis was sadly predictable. For most Black Americans, the inequality that fueled fiery protests more than 50 years ago remains unaddressed. Tens of thousands have protested over the past several months in at least 75 US cities in the week since Floyd's death. The slow response to the challenge of police brutality has made racial tensions in that divided country, very polarized country, even worse in the midst of a once-in-a-century pandemic. But Canadians ought not make the assumption that our country has not been impacted by the same currents of racial injustice and entrenched systemic inequality. Canada is also confronted by the same major and historical challenges, which include anti-Black racism, police brutality, the controversial practice of carding, and the wide economic disparities encountered by Indigenous communities, Black communities, and people of color. Indeed, in the wake of the long-awaited verdict in the trial of Ottawa Police Constable Daniel Monson, we recognize that our community has relived and continues to relive the trauma of Abdi Rahman Abdi's death, pain that will last for many more years to come. Our thoughts are with the Abdi family, friends, and loved ones as they continue to grieve. As a city, we acknowledge that the outcome of this case will continue to put stress on the relationship between police and the community, specifically the Black, Somali, and Muslim communities, and those facing mental health challenges. Because too many people in Canada, and in particular our own city, experience high levels of racism and injustice, it is important that we take continued steps to ensure that the human rights and dignity of all people are protected. That can only be achieved when we individually and collectively take action to disrupt and dismantle the systems and conditions that perpetuate racism and oppression in our society. We have seen discrimination through prejudice, ignorance, and racist stereotyping, which ultimately has led to disparities in income, employment, housing, healthcare, and education. We must acknowledge that these factors, when combined with systemic racism being not individual acts of racism, but actual structures and the ways that organizations are constituted, which create roadblocks for people. We have to acknowledge that when this is combined with those type of factors, it really does lead to recurrent negative interactions with public institutions, with the police service, and leads to overrepresentation of racialized people within the criminal justice system. I believe it is the responsibility of all governments at all levels to spearhead the fight against racism, and especially systemic or institutional racism. As a city, we have responded to requests by Indigenous, Black, racialized, and religious communities to really start to take action. And we're trying to do that by establishing an anti-racism secretariat that will work towards the elimination of systemic racism in our municipal government's operations and services. As we know, we continue to experience discrimination, and it is a direct challenge, and it's an ongoing challenge. In fact, in my own ward, and now I'll refer to part of the presentation here. as we know, in my own ward, just 1 month after my election in April 2019, as the first Black city councillor in the city's history, as you can imagine, many people were elated, especially in the racialized community, that there was, for the first time, a Black representative, because representation does matter. And we're going to have a stark demonstration of that in just a moment here on the slide. So everybody in the community was very ecstatic. There was a large number that came out to see my installation as councillor on April 16th, 2019. In 2019. And then literally a month later, in my own ward, a Black family in Rideau Rockcliffe was subjected to a hate crime, where a vandal left a message in Black paint on the garage door that had a racially charged word followed by "get out." Obviously, that's not a situation that we accepted as a community or as a city. And in fact, the community did not accept that. As you can see, this is the patriarch of that household saying, he's not going anywhere. And that was the sentiment of the entire Black community the month after my election, with a large number of the community standing in solidarity with the Conga family, saying that this wasn't acceptable. And while this was an individual act of racism, the community said, you know what, we don't accept individual acts. We unfortunately accept that they are a part of our continued reality. We don't want them to be. But the one thing that we really can't accept is not being treated equally in front of our government. So this was the opportunity as a situation that was unacceptable as a community or a city. This was really one of the inflection points for the creation of an anti-racism secretariat. It was also the inflection point for a discussion about hate crimes. Because as we know, Ottawa has one of the highest rates of hate crimes amongst Canadian cities, according to numbers released by Statistics Canada. There were 105 hate crimes reported to police, or 9.8 incidents per 100,000 people in 2018. After this specific incident in my ward, we moved quickly as a community and city to actively take measures to eliminate systemic racism through the creation of an anti-racism office at the city. In the city's 2020 budget, council committed funding ultimately for my proposal for the development of an anti-racism office. And once again, this emerged directly from people in the city, the community members around the Conga family, across the Black community, across the racialized community, saying, we want to ensure that we have real recourse to challenges at the city. And so in the 2020 budget, council committed funding for my proposal for the development of an anti-racism office, a corporate anti-racism strategy, and also hired Yusra Osman, a full-time anti-racism specialist. I'm very proud that Mayor Watson and my council colleagues wholeheartedly embraced the creation of this new policy unit and position. The creation of the Anti-Racism Secretariat will target systemic racism by building an anti-racism approach into the way our city government develops policies, makes decisions, evaluates programs, and monitors outcomes. The policy unit will be a real manifestation of the city's equity and inclusion lens, building on the work that the city started in 2015. And the Secretariat, as proposed, will seek to identify and eliminate systemic barriers for racialized people by addressing 6 major areas of focus. And now I'm going to outlined those major areas. And these areas were actually devised by the community. So we had the incident at the Conga House. The community came together and said, we wanted to see the establishment of an anti-racism secretariat to address systemic racism or institutional racism. What we did in terms of my office was that summer, so the summer after I was elected, we sat down with community members and asked what were the key areas that they wanted to see addressed. And we crystallized those elements, created a proposal, took that proposal to council, to the mayor, and saw it within the 6 to 8 months that I was elected, moved forward in the city budget. I actually have colleagues who were actually impressed, who told me, you know, most people don't get things done in the first term in terms of budget initiatives. But they were very impressed that we were actually able to do that within the first 6 to 8 months that I was in office. And I told my council colleagues that that was only possible because of the community response and the community push for this type of change. So one of the areas that the community wants to see change in is in terms of employment equity. The City of Ottawa workforce of 17,000 people does not reflect the 25% of people in Ottawa who are racialized, particularly city staff, upper management, and the leadership decision-making level. And this is important to note, not that we're talking about specific targets or quotas, but in reality, I think that a city's government's workforce should really reflect the diversity of a city to provide greater legitimacy and for people to have a greater understanding, especially people who are working at the city, of the populations that they're working with. And right now, the number of racialized people in the city who are employed by the city equals about 12.5%. Even the mayor acknowledges when he looks at senior leadership, because before COVID, you know, we would be in council chambers, and when we were at city council, if there are questions to be asked, we'd be asking them to the senior leadership team who sit across from us, directly across from us, around the horseshoe table. And the mayor has noted that he looks at the faces in the leadership team, and he doesn't believe that that actually reflects the diversity of the city. And he acknowledges that that's a problem. So that's an issue that our community actually did emphasize, that they did want to see some change in employment equity. Secondly, the community wants to see equity in governance. The city's commissions, agencies, and boards have an impact on the decisions of the lives of residents. And many people do believe that these institutions, that these boards should proportionately reflect Ottawa's population. Housing. Immigrants struggle with housing affordability due to the large number of people on the housing registry. And there's been an acknowledgement that the city must invest more in housing and eliminate discrimination in housing policies. And as the budget for 2021 comes up, you'll be hearing more from myself and other urban colleagues around the council table about the need, the greater need for investment in affordable housing. Because it's really unacceptable when we have new Canadians come to this country for them to be, for new immigrants to be in really poor conditions, to be in overcrowded conditions, to be housed in motel rooms for longer than 8 to 12 months. These things are not acceptable, and we definitely need to move towards greater equality and equity in terms of the housing that's provided to all people in the city. Economic development was also a key factor that we heard from. community. We understand from the community and believe that the city should provide a more equitable economic opportunities through social procurement and community benefit programs that promote economic inclusion for all of its residents. And this was put in stark relief to me at one of those public consultations when people, in the community said, when I enter into City Hall and I see the cleaner and the cleaners are Black, my future expectation is that that Black cleaner should be the one running that cleaning company, winning the contract, and having access to wider economic opportunities so that communities can be strengthened. Health outcomes are very important, especially around mental health supports, because there aren't culturally relevant mental health supports for many racialized and religious communities, and the Black community in particular. And we're starting to do that work in conjunction with the University of Ottawa around a mental health study for youth that deals with the challenges that different diverse groups face every day. Because we've heard, especially from youth, and especially from youth in the Black community, that the impact of microaggressions and the challenges of racism every day has a substantive impact on people's mental health. So that is an area that the Secretariat will focus on. And finally, one of the areas that we heard about was increasing and improving youth development, because the 21st century economy requires more educational opportunities for young people, for them to be able to prosper in economically marginalized communities. This was one of the driving factors for me to get involved in politics, actually, was the lack of social services for youth. And I was actually overjoyed yesterday because I was at a celebration online for youth who had participated, area youth who had participated in a after-school program. Now it's virtual, of course, but a virtual after-school program that dealt with providing extra math skills and that focused specifically on self-esteem for youth. And I was really excited because the person who led that program initially, when we were working together at the Overbrook Community Association, he wasn't able to get a $5,000 grant to put on this program during critical hours at the community center. And that was one of the reasons why I ran for office. I said that it's really a travesty if we can't find $5,000 out of the city treasury to provide to community groups who are providing this good work to ensure that youth have greater opportunities, especially during critical hours after school. And we were able, through discussions with the social services department at the city, to really start moving towards a model where small micro grants through our community resource centers could be allocated to these after school programs. And so my friend, Dr. Manjur Chaudhry, was able to win one of those grants. And I joked with him, I said, my work is now done. We were able to do what we had initially wanted to do to ensure that there were investments, but there are many more investments, and obviously more investments need to be made on a wider scale. So this is something that we've heard loud and clear from the community, that we need to continue to work towards those wider investments. Now, these 6 pillars: employment equity, equity and governance, housing, economic development, health outcomes, and youth development, will be the major areas of focus for consultation and action planning that will be scheduled for this November. This anti-racism office will also launch a public engagement survey to continue to refine the Secretariat's priorities. The office will also host a city staff learning event on applying gender and race lenses to data this month. And we're inviting communities to get involved in that consultation process. So right now, you can go online through the city's website. The city runs a dialogue discussion board called Engage Ottawa, and it really deploys online tools to allow you to make comment on initiatives. And as you might notice, that page is located at engage.ottawa.ca. And very prominently, there is an area that is focused on anti-racism and ethnocultural relations initiatives. And you can click on that and learn more about the future consultations when those come into place. Ideally, they'll be around each of those pillars that I had outlined. And there's always the ongoing consultation. So there's always ongoing input that you can provide, written input about your concerns around racism and the challenges that it really confronts for the city. So as you can see, over the last period of time since I've been elected, and this is why I think representation matters, over the last year and a half, we've seen the creation of this anti-racism office, and we're also seeing the creation of a new gender and race equity, inclusion, Indigenous relations and social development service at the city to fulfill council's commitment to women and gender equity, anti-racism, Indigenous reconciliation, diversity and inclusion, which was announced by city staff just a few weeks ago, and that will provide the logistical support and the housing for the new anti-racism office. These new initiatives, I believe, demonstrate the seriousness in which our government takes responsibility to identify when members of our communities are denied equal opportunity to succeed and to eliminate the systemic barriers creating this inequity, especially in the nation's capital of a country that has officially adopted a policy of multiculturalism. When you think about it, we're one of the only countries that have really enumerated the idea of multiculturalism within its constitution. That really creates a responsibility to go above and beyond to ensure equality in terms of government institutions and access to them. And so our government, in my estimation, has a responsibility to really identify when members of our communities are denied this equal opportunity to succeed and eliminate these systemic barriers to creating this inequality. It's the goal of the Anti-Racism Secretariat to do just that, whether it's related to employment, governance, health, housing, or economic development. And I look forward to the Secretariat providing support to community groups who have long labored towards equity and social justice. As a community as well, and I'm thinking about the civil society and social services, we are also coming together. And we're doing that actually through United for All. And this is really an initiative of Ottawa's social services sector being led by the United Way, coming together to form a coalition called United for All. And United for All is comprised of a growing partnership of organizations in the Ottawa region that have come together to address the issues of hate-based violence and extremism in Ottawa. The group has a table of champions, and I'm around that table along with the mayor, at least at the city council level, to represent the leadership of our city, as well as member organizations that represent the diversity of our community. We are currently in the first year of this initiative, and the coalition has been building a citywide approach to tackling hate and violence with the goal of securing public and private funding to bolster its work. United for All has a long-term goal to build social resilience, to support education, advocacy, research, and ultimately to overcome hate, bigotry, and racism in Ottawa. We continue to recognize that First Nations, Inuit, Métis, new immigrants, and different racialized and religious communities all call Ottawa home and have a right to fully participate in our city. And as a collective, as council, I'm sure the mayor believes this, and I do definitely believe this. And we want residents to know that our council and many other people and groups in our city are collectively committed to actual systemic change and to the elimination of racism in our city, which is long overdue. Once again, I'd really like to thank the Unitarian Church for inviting me this morning. This discussion is absolutely essential if we want to achieve progress for equity of opportunity and outcome for all residents in our city. And it's a dialogue that we have to continuously pursue in order to seek that social change that we are looking for. So thank you so much for this opportunity to discuss what the city is doing in terms of addressing this continuing longstanding challenge.
And thank you so much, Councillor King. That was very informative and useful, I think, for all of us. I know this summer, with protests happening across North America and really the world, as you mentioned, and the recent ruling in the Aberdeen Abbey case, we've really started to have, many people have started to reckon with racism who maybe previously haven't. And I appreciate all that you shared in terms of the city's initiatives. As concerning as it is to find out, I didn't know this, that Ottawa has some of the highest rates of hate crimes in the country. It's also heartening and hopeful to feel like we're part of a city that is, at least on some level, taking the issue of racism and anti-Blackness in particular seriously to address it. So I've received some questions in the chat. If anybody else has other questions, please feel free to write them in. The first question, I'm going to combine both Jane, Lindsay, Justine, and Reverend Pat offered sort of variations on a similar question, which is essentially, what would you like to see groups like ours do to help change racism in Ottawa, or how can congregations get involved in some of the initiatives that you described?
Well, I think it's important to actually be involved in the public consultation process. And we know that congregations and the religious communities have usually been the vanguard for change. I mean, ultimately, all religions are dedicated to equality amongst peoples. And so it's important to hear those voices loud and clear, because typically it's the religious voices that have driven the moral leadership on these issues. And that's obvious when we see, whether it's throughout North America or the shining example, of course, the United States in the 1960s, when we heard the moral voices of pastors and other religious leaders really driving the charge for social change. So contributing that voice and contributing the understanding of the constraints on people and how we can liberate people from those constraints and articulating that is absolutely important. And I think that religious organizations do that day after day after day after day. And so I want to see as many people come to the table to provide input on the gaps that they're seeing. And that's going to be what will occur with the virtual consultation process that is scheduled for November. I don't think that the specific times have been scheduled by city staff, but we want to encourage people to get involved, because if they see gaps, we need to know from the public what those gaps are, what the problems are. I know, a lot of people in the community, especially the Black community, would tell me, well, we know what they are, Rawlson. We've been encountering this for 400 years. Within the last 50 years, there have been a tremendous number of reports. We have a lot of academic reports. That's true. But the view I take, and I try to also be very honest with the community, is that despite the fact that there's a heavy weight on my shoulders, I don't see myself as that one person who is responsible for the Black community. the Black community has its own advocates. I am an elected official for a geographic area. I share their concerns, and I'm trying to move their concerns forward, but the voices from the community is what counts. And the voices, we don't discount the power of those voices. So it's like I said, you know, I was elected, there was elation, April 2019, and then May, literally a month to the day, there was deflation. But the community members did not see that as something to get you know, exercised about in a negative way. They said, how can we transform this into something positive? And they said, we want to see the establishment of an anti-hate office, of an anti-racism office at the city. And so that horrible incident that negatively affected the Conga family turned into something that was positive for the city. And that's because their voices were heard by an elected representative. That representation mattered in terms of who was sitting around the table to advance new ideas and to make them reality. And so in order for us to do that, we have to hear the voices of communities. And that's why I think it's important for you know, different religious organizations to be involved on an ongoing basis and to identify those issues, because what we want to do in this public consultation is action planning. The idea is to hear what the problems are and then to quickly move those into policy prescriptions that will create solutions for communities. So it will be very important to have many people around the table, whether it is simply advocacy, moral advocacy, or if it's relaying lived experiences and ways that we can improve people's lived experiences. I think that's the way to move forward. So I would encourage you to get involved in this process because I'm serious. I'm hoping that city government is serious. I mean, I'm a check on city government on behalf of my residents, but I was serious with this proposal to actually see real meaningful change, and that is community-based. And so it will be important to hear from the community to see what changes are required and what changes are necessary for Ottawa.
Thank you very much for that. And I've been reminded by my partner upstairs that I'm not supposed to out the people who are asking questions. So if anybody would like to ask a question privately, I won't announce who you are. You can submit it to me, directly to me in the chat, or directly to Justine. And on that note, we did have another couple questions which were along a similar vein. So I'm going to group them together. And they were about the Police Services Board, or more broadly, the Ottawa Police Service. Can you speak specifically to how, what sort of changes we may want to see from police services in Ottawa to address racism, and if you're involved at all in, or if you have any experience in sort of making those changes come about?
So the good news was just a few days ago, I was officially appointed to Police Services Board. So I was officially sworn in. The mayor had decided to yield his seat to me so that we could really make those connections in terms of what the city is doing with anti-racism and what the police service is doing in terms of anti-racism. That's one of the reasons why I'm actually supportive, and I'll be blunt about this, about the police services budget, because we have a new police chief. He's the first Black police chief that the city has ever had as well. And this is actually an interesting nexus because we also have the first Black director of education at the Public English School Board as well. So it's an interesting nexus of people over the last year who are in leadership positions in the city. But one of the first things that this very progressive police chief did was say we need substantive reforms. He actually acknowledged the fact that the police service has systemic racism. And we can actually see that he's making waves because there was massive pushback. As you might have known or seen in the press, there was a horrible meme, online meme, that started to circulate around the fact that he just noted the obvious. He just stated reality that systemic racism is permeated through any public institution and needs to be addressed. And he actually has outlined plans, which I was sworn into Police Services Board on Thursday, and I'll be at my first meeting on Monday. But he will be addressing a package of reforms that he's looking to undertake in his first full budget that will deal with a better mental health strategy, with engaging more social service organizations in terms of response than the police responding. I mean, he's acknowledged that the police are not social workers. And there has been a pullback in terms of investments in social services. And that's one of the reasons why we see greater interface with the police service. But he doesn't want to see that. He wants to see greater social service and public health responses to these challenges than police sworn officer intervention. So that's something we're going to see. He's also introduced a new equity, diversity, and inclusion program. He's actually created a respect and value directorate at the police service that is going to look at ensuring that we really emphasize equity and diversity. We improve training, we improve hiring, because that's part of the problem as well, ensuring that we start to renew the frontline service so that we have people who are more understanding of the challenges of people and who are more reflective of the community in terms of the diversity. So there's a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done at Police Services Board. I know the inherent challenge of serving on that board, the potential criticism and the challenges, but I think that we are right now at a critical juncture where we have a police services board, police service board chair, Diane Deems, who is committed to reform, who drove this process to have this progressive chief here, that we have a chief who's also interested in ensuring that there is a tremendous amount of investment that goes into equity and policing, because that's what we've heard from the community about. When I was serving on on the Police Services Community Equity Council, and as a president of a community association, we heard that we wanted from especially racialized communities that people want a fairness in terms of the way that they're treated, and that they want those investments so that the service becomes more diverse. It understands equity. It treats people in a better way when they're interfacing with people, and they're seeking equity in results. And equity in results is actually quite important. This is another element that people don't consider, because often we just hear about people who are so dissatisfied with the police that they want to move forward with a model that would just simply remove resources. But the challenge, of course, is if we remove resources, we can't do this work around equity in policing. And equity in policing also extends, in my estimation, to the criminal justice elements. One of the most shocking kind of components of this job, something that I never anticipated that I would be doing within the first year of office, is sitting in living rooms of Black families who have lost youth to gun violence.
Yeah.
And families where the youth were, I can honestly say this, were not involved in any street activity. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And equity in policing also extends to those families who did not receive calls of condolences from the police service after they lost their child, or families where they go to the crime scene and they themselves are treated with no respect or as criminals, or and I'm hearing this. To me, it's unbelievable, because these are scenarios that didn't even occur in my ward. I drove across the city to a new suburb being developed in Orleans to sit in the living room of a mother who was laying on the floor weeping, and the father telling me, the police come, they're undertaking their investigation. They don't tell us anything about where the investigation is going. And when they're interviewing us, we feel like we're criminals.
Yeah.
That's another element of seeking equity in policing. And that requires training, that requires a unit that's looking at how do we interface in better ways with diverse communities that have been victimized by crime. That involves potentially having more racialized people on the force who can actually commiserate with that type of loss and commiserate and actually communicate in a more effective way with people. So the approach that I'm going to take is maximizing reform in conjunction with my colleagues and in ensuring that we are pushing for as much modernization as possible so that we can really achieve equity in policing. Because this is the key, and this is what I believe the Conga family was expecting. This is another interesting example, because when the family got together and the community got together a month after my election, they said, we have to address this. And they started to make some phone calls. And one of the things that they learned was, we thought we had a hate crimes unit in Ottawa, right? But we learned, and I don't know if everybody remembers this, but the press learned and the community learned that we actually did not have one. At some point, the police service said, we don't have the proper resources to do this. So we will fold this into the resources that we dedicate to other intelligence around terrorism and fighting radicalization. So, the community at first, one of the first dialogues we had was, Rawlson, this is not right. And we want to talk with the police, and we would like you to bring together the community to have a moderated session with the police. So I did that, and I was warned by one of my other colleagues, which was interesting. So at the time, we didn't have our new police chief yet. We had an acting police chief in the interim. And I was actually warned by one of my colleagues. They said, Rawlson, actually be very careful when you do that, because under provincial legislation, under the Police Services Act, council and councillors, individual councillors cannot direct the operational components of the police. We, by law, are not allowed to tell the police how they should constitute themselves. So you can imagine this was a very interesting meeting, because we had about 20 people from the Black community asking, why isn't there a hate crimes unit? And we listened to the deputy chiefs telling us we don't have the resources. And this once again speaks to equity in policing. It's interesting, and the idea of systemic racism. Why wouldn't we have that? So, the deputy chief at the time looked into the eyes of some of the community members and said, so what you're saying, despite the fact that we have this across the broad range of resources of the police service, and we have all of the members are dedicated to this mission, you're saying that you would rather have 2 people maybe in an office with a brass tag on the door that says hate crimes unit operating? And they were saying, yes, we obviously want to have an investigative unit because it shows the importance of this. And of course, I had to sit there and say, well, you heard from the community, as you know, acting chief, I can't direct you. And I literally had to be very legalistic about this. I can't direct you to do anything, but you've heard from the community, right? Once Chief Slowly was elected or appointed to the position, he had a conversation with myself, he had a conversation with the community, and he moved forthwith to reinstitute a hate investigation section at the city, which I just had a meeting with a few days ago. So it shows you equity in policing is very important. My belief is that it has to be resourced, and it is very counterintuitive because obviously people are not pleased with the idea of the police service obtaining resources or additional resources. But the high irony of this is that if we cut resources from the police service, who will suffer first? And my feeling is it's going to be that young diverse hire who would be laid off, or it will be the hate crimes unit that will be folded into some other type of structure, so that we can economize or make things more efficient. So this is the challenge that we have, but I believe that we have a new police chief who's dedicated to these changes. So I just want you to know that I'm going to be around the table, kind of bringing that equity lens, the community lens. We have constraints. It's not a simple system. It's not easy to defund anything in the police service because legislation says that it has to have adequate funding. City council is apart from the police services board. Police services board has 4 appointees from the city, but 3 provincial appointees. If we don't fulfill the mandate of ensuring that there's adequate policing, other civilian organizations would actually step in and do that for us if we don't fulfill the mandate. And obviously there are structural challenges around the Police Services Act that tells us that we direct strategy, not operations. So a lot of people pick up the phone and say, we see the wasted resources, the police are directing traffic here and there. It's like, we can't tell the chief how their operations, how the operation should be affected. The chief is in charge of that. And the chief is also, in a sense, directed by legislation in terms of how that works. The good news, and this is the last point, because I know I'm going on a little long on this question, but it's a very important one. There will be more consultation. I think that this is what's important, ensuring that there are more consultative opportunities for communities. Some of that will be through the community well-being plan. So there's now a legislative mandated approach where issues that are social are seen through a social lens and have directives that are outside of the police's jurisdiction. I think that's going to be very important. And that's an ongoing consultation process that you should also be able, I believe, to find on engageottawa.ca. But it's an ongoing process of community consultation to say, what are the key areas of social impact, social issues that are impacting the city, and how do we address them through more of a social lens than trying to apply a law enforcement lens. And we are the only jurisdiction in Canada that actually has that. And it will mandate the chief in terms of some of the approaches that are taken. So that's very important. And we will have a mental health strategy where we will be pushing for more meaningful community input and social services input on how that goes forward and how we improve response to mental health crisis.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we have less than 10 minutes left here, and I've received a lot of questions, which is good because it means there's interest in tackling racism within Ottawa. Various questions on housing, specific incidents that have occurred, policing, but I'm going to just turn it over to, we have a still newish intern minister, Ian, who just moved to Ottawa recently and had a question for you. So Ian, I'll unmute you now.
Thank you, Tara. You're so kind. And thank you, Councilman King, for being here. My question, well, first, I appreciate you mentioning not being a councilman for Black people, but for your geographical area, and also naming that you bring an equity lens to the table. However, as a Black person who is also often the only Black person at the decision-making table, I wonder how you make distinctions between voicing the concerns of the most marginalized, which often is Black people, and voicing your own perspective, considering that you are Black, you can't take it off. And I ask this question because in my experience, whenever I name a community issue that is impacting Black people disproportionately, I'm often viewed as only being concerned about Black people because I am also Black. How do you make that distinction?
What I try to do is I try to have direct consultation with the community all the time as a check. What's interesting around the council table and other places is that there's an automatic assumption that you are speaking for all Black people. We're smart enough to know that the Black community isn't monolithic. There's they're different, like any community. They're different views ideologically, logistically, in terms of tactics, in terms of the challenges that confront the community. But what I try to do is I try to be grounded, and I try to contact the community, and I don't think that I am simply operating always like any decision that I'm making or anything that I'm thinking is automatically what the Black community is thinking. So on occasional basis, we hold virtual town halls with the Black community to listen to concerns and to move them forward. I think that's very important to do. So that way I'm not making the assumption that I am automatically speaking for everyone. What's interesting is that often items are in alignment, and I do have somebody in my office, Sophia Jacob, who works as an equity and diversity liaison. She works on a contractual basis in my office. That is something different. That's something that I had to really put in place right away, because as you can imagine, it's not just the people of Rideau Rockcliffe who are calling about the quality of their parks or their cycling lanes or speeding or potholes or the development files, which are the typical things, land use, which is the raison d'etre for city council. We also have the added responsibility of the grieving mother in Orleans, right? Who wants to really express the challenges that are confronting them as a family with a criminal investigation and the loss of a child. So we have a wider number of concerns that we're engaged in. But what I try to do is I try to listen to the community first, and then I try to see what maximally can we get done within a system. And that's the other thing I have to remind people is I work within a system. What I'm trying to do is trying to take activism and really see it out to action. But of course, the legal system creates constraints. So as example, people talk about defund the police. Structurally in Ontario, we can't do that. We don't actually elect sheriffs who have a clear mandate who could say, I can reduce spending or I can spend on specific areas. We have a very interesting system that allows for indirect control at council. Council votes on a budget, but cannot take a line by line audit and remove certain elements out of the budget. As a member of Police Services Board, I can only give strategic direction. If we see something that we don't like operationally, we can't say to the chief, go change that. That's actually against the law. So, there's a challenge there, obviously, because that's where I'm talking about the inherent contradiction. You have a Black person here, people will be upset about police brutality, but there's a system that is in place. I'm a lawmaker, I'm going to work within a system, but the challenge is giving the system a nudge, continuing to push for reform, and doing that in conjunction with community members outside to do that. And acknowledging that there are these restrictions, but it is much better to have somebody around the table than not to have anyone around the table, because representation matters.
Thank you for that. And I think because we are so close to 10 o'clock, I'm going to thank Councillor King so much for sharing your time and your insights with us today. We will be moving to an informal discussion where everybody can sort of reflect and talk about what we heard this morning. You're welcome to stay for that, but you obviously don't have to. And I think you've given me a lot to think about, in addition to practical actions that I can take as somebody living in Ottawa to engage with the city's initiatives for tackling racism. So we appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.